The shrimp pond was first built during the Walker era, around 1970, when Gordon Mobley built these two dikes to connect to the outer island to the mainland, thereby creating the shrimp pond. And during the 1970s and 1980s, they raised shrimp here, and its shape at that time was perfect for shrimp farming because it was shallow and had a nice gentle slope to it with a sandy bottom. By 1998, we realized that shrimp would not be compatible with the way Spring Island would be used in the future because shrimp are very vulnerable to pulses of fresh water. And so it is that time that the shrimp pond's use was converted from raising shrimp to becoming a fishing destination.
In 2002, there were two galvanized metal water control structures that were installed to control the flow of the water here. One of those structures failed in 2009, and since the other structure was of the same material and installed at the same time, it was only a matter of time before that one failed also. So in 2010, we began the permitting process to actually drain and dredge this pond. The pond was drained in April of 2011, and we transported 500 game fish that were redfish, drums, flounders, and sea trout to our Great Salt Pond. The pond was left to dry between April and July when we actually started the dredging in August and September. 2 channels were dug, and we took 1,000 large dump trucks of soil out of here to dredge the 2 channels.
We're in the shrimp pond on Spring Island right now, and we're putting in rice trunks so that we can manipulate the water level. And this is the last step of a multi-year process. The initial idea was this was impounded during the 1950s, and hence the name. It was used to raise shrimp for people on Spring Island before the development. This is both a federally and a state regulated project. These are wetlands of the United States, and therefore went through a permitting process to receive the permits to do this work. Once we earned those permits, we then were able to do this excavation. In general, we've excavated 2 canals that go through the pond. That allows water to come in on one end and go out on the other end. The overall goal here is to increase the water quality and the fisheries habitat quality. And the best way to do that is increase water flow through the impoundment. Water will come in on one side and it'll go out on the other. We dug these canals rather than just digging out the entire pond. We dug out these canals so that we'd have some pockets of areas of deep water so that when fish, especially during the winter or summertime, became stressed, they would have deeper water habitat to go to. This process we initially drained the pond in late March, early April, got it down to a low level, came in, seined out all of the remaining fish that were still in there, transported those to another pond. Then we allowed the pond to sit drained for several months, allowing that subsurface water to get out of the pond. Once that was done, we then were able to come in with long arm excavators and excavate the canals that you see behind me.
When we drained the pond, we wanted to save the game fish because they're very valuable and take a long time to grow if you start with small ones. So we trapped all of the fish in nets, hand caught them and put them in either nets or pails, quickly transported them to 600-gallon tanks that actually had oxygen pumped into them that we borrowed from the DNR to transport those fish to the Great Salt Pond. And fortunately, we transported about 500 of them and only lost a very few. So we were most successful in saving those game fish. And again, they were reds, drums, sea trout, and flounder. Get rid of my clothes, and I went and washed my clothes twice, and the mud that was stuck in them still had such a stench that I actually just had to throw my clothes and my tennis shoes away and never wear them again.
This is a scale model of a tidal rice field trunk. It's what we call a Cumbie style rice field trunk. This design has been used in tidal rice fields in the South Carolina Lowcountry since the late 1700s. The design that we see here we can document to at least the 1780s. Might have been used a little bit before then. And in general, it's a valve system that allows water either inside of the impoundment or water to go outside of the impoundment. The general dimensions of what we call a standard rice field trunk are 32 feet from this end to that end. The height of the box, this being the box, is typically 18 inches, sometimes 24. These are the uprights, this piece right here, and this is typically about 16 feet. The width of the trunk is anywhere from 4 to 5 feet wide, sometimes as much as 6 feet wide. This, of course, is what we call the box. This end right here, this round piece, is called a muzzle. It takes a lot of craftsmanship to build this muzzle because it needs to create a watertight seal to the door. And this thing here on the angle is the door. This is what we call a flashboard riser. In general, this structure that we're putting in behind us, this would be on the creek side, the tidal creek side. High tide would come up to somewhere about here. Low tide would be at least at the door, the muzzle, or below. And this would be the impoundment, whether it's the rice field or the saltwater impoundment that we have here. So in general, there is a dike, earthen levee or berm that goes right here, and this sits in it. If we wanted to put water into the pond, we wanted water to go in that direction, we'd use a little bar. And of course, the top of the dike is right here. Somebody would be standing here and they'd have a bar, and you'd stick in these holes, these off-center holes at the end, and lift it up. As you lift it up, you would move these pegs further down such that you could hold the door open. And you can see there that water can come in. Once you do that, you would then make sure that the door on the inside is completely closed. So we're prepared to take water into the rice field or the impoundment. As the tide comes up, that water is going to come through this box and spill into the impoundment. Tide will come up to about right here, somewhere in this general vicinity. As the tide is coming up, water is coming through. When the tide goes back down, all of this water wants to go back as well. One of the reasons the muzzle is so important is when that tide goes back out, this water pushes this door tight so that you create a watertight seal all the way around the end there so that water can't leak out. So over a series of tides, you'll slowly be able to increase the water level in the pond up to the highest point that the tide reaches out in the marsh. Once you do that, you might want to influence the water level inside. Before the Civil War and even right after the Civil War, the way we would do that is we would adjust this door so that we'd slowly let water out. Well, rice fields remained important after the Civil War, so this structure, which is what we call a flashboard riser, was created. And essentially what happens is it has a series of boards here. All the water from this point up would spill down into the box, but because the water level is that high, it creates water pressure here, so the water can't spill back into the field. So the water comes into the box, and then on low tide will drain out of the impoundment. So over a series of days or weeks, by slowly adjusting, pulling these boards out, you can drop the water level. If you want to increase the water level, you put these boards back in. A series of tides, we put water back into the impoundment. We're going to use this at the shrimp pond to bring water in on one end of the pond and then release it on the other end of the pond. And we're going to use this rice trunk the same way we use rice trunks for hundreds of years in rice fields.
One of the great things about having rice trunks located here in the shrimp ponds is that they allow the pond to receive much of the nutrients and the rich food that's created in the adjacent salt marsh. By having these doors swing open during a high tide, they're not only letting in all the food that's been growing in the great adjacent salt marsh, but they also let in even full-size fish. One of the reasons that this shrimp pond is such a productive fishing location is because of the really large high tides that we have in our area. During spring tides, there will be almost a 10-foot difference between high tide and low tide. The exceptionally high tides in the Port Royal Sound mean that we have the opportunity here in the shrimp pond to get ample water exchange. By that I mean that when the tide is really high on the outside, often a 10-foot difference between high tide and low tide, that outer pressure pushes a great deal of water into the shrimp pond. With that water comes lots of small fish and crustaceans that'll provide food for the fish and the other marine life that live in the shrimp pond. In order for us to take full advantage of those really high tides, however, one of the things that we'll be doing is periodically we'll be actually temporarily lowering the water level inside the shrimp pond. At first, this might look like it's not good for the fish in the shrimp pond, but actually it's just the opposite. When we lower the level in the shrimp pond, that means when a very high tide comes, there's a lot more pressure on the outside and we're able to take in a lot more water during that high tide. And with that water comes more food for the fish in the form of small fish, crustaceans, and zooplankton.
brush it that way. Greg's got it. That's all right. Calm down. Greg got it.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate everybody that's turning out. I'd like to start out with thanking Mark Solo, our president, for giving us the opportunity to start this program that we have now and helping to fund it. So, Mark, if you don't mind, everybody knows you, I hope. And I'd like to introduce you to all of our members of the Fisheries Management Committee. We're not a fishing committee anymore, we're fisheries management, and that means that we're going to work on our pond and we're going to get the fishing back at a world-class experience here on Spring Island. First, I'd like to Jerry Ayers, would you stand up? Tom Foster, Bill Knowlton, Charles Mankert, and Mike Perry, with a person that is really, really important to us, and that's Art Hendricks, who has given his all for years in setting up what we call the derbies and writing the articles that we all enjoy so much. And Art would like to thank you all.